Well, as you just heard in the news, an investigation into the scandal-ridden East branch of the Health Services Union has uncovered enormous pay rises and questionable credit card purchases. For more, our political correspondent Melissa Clark joins us now from Canberra. And of course, Melissa, we've heard so much about this union, and this report is probably even worse than we first thought.
And what we now have is a lot of detail that has been collated by barrister Ian Temby QC and Dennis Robertson, who is an accountant. And these two were asked by the HSU's Governing Council to look into all of these allegations and see what recommendations they could make once some of the more salacious claims started coming to light. Now, this report has made its way to the ABC, and the details are quite shocking. In some part, they do rely largely on the evidence of Kathy Jackson, who is a factional rival of Michael Williamson. And Michael Williamson, as the former General Secretary and Treasury of the HSU, is the one who comes in for most scrutiny in this report. It makes a large number of claims about companies that he owns getting contracts for union business that never went to tender, and we're talking in the order of millions of dollars. They accuse him of having his businesses housed in union properties but out not paying any rent. They accuse him of having at least 5 of his family members having amongst the highest paid jobs within the Health Services Union. There's also accusations about Michael Williamson using an architect to do work on a holiday home for himself personally, but being paid for by HSU funds. So there are a plethora of claims here that are very damning against Michael Williamson. He hasn't responded to these claims either to Ian Temby or to the ABC's attempts to speak to him. But what we do have is very forensic detail from Ian Temby QC outlining precisely his concerns, not only with these allegations of misuse and cronyism, but also the lack of any sort of formal processes in place when it comes to financial management. Even simple things like keeping track of orders and having orders written down are things that seem to be absent within the Health Services Union.
Where does it go from here, Melissa? What's the impact going to be?
Well, given we've already heard so much about the dysfunction within the Health Services Union, it's unlikely that even these revelations are going to be much more damaging, given that I don't think the HSU and some of those involved could necessarily have their reputation lowered in the eyes of some of the public. Such has been the detail and information and scandal surrounding it so far. But what it will do is add to that pressure that is there on the union movement to be more accountable. The federal government says it's already moved to tighten up for union regulations. The union movement itself says it's always looking at ways to improve. But what we have is the government trying to make sure that the public see this as a one-off, that this isn't endemic across the workplace relations system and across the union movement. And that's the message that the Workplace Relations Minister, Bill Shorten, a former union head himself, was trying to put forward when he spoke to 7:30 last night.
Everyone is disappointed by the reports emanating from the HSU East branch. I haven't seen the particular report you're referring to, but the government's own regulator, Fair Work Australia, has concluded an investigation. What the government's done since we've heard all these matters is put in an administrator. We've also tightened up union regulation for all unions. But again, in answer to your question, I want to stress the vast majority of Australian trade unions, trade unionists, people representing unions, work very hard and their conduct is exemplary. And I don't think that a few rotten eggs, a few rotten apples should be allowed to describe the whole of the labour movement in Australia.
Bill Shorten there, Melissa, but still not a great look for the government. And of course, not good news too for Julia Gillard again with the news poll out today.
There has certainly been some Labor figures waiting to see this latest news poll. What the Labor Party in general is hoping for is that they can have a gradual clawback of their primary vote position, and in particular they were hoping that the start of the carbon tax would give them a bit of a fresh start. The latest news poll, although we're not talking radical movements here, we are seeing Labor's primary vote drop since the last news poll. It's at 28%, so that's down 3 points, which is just on the margin of error. But nonetheless, it shows that the Labor Party isn't getting what it wants, which is a gradual clawback of its primary vote. The primary vote is desperately low compared to the Coalition's 46%, and it's staying that way. Now, Labor may be able to take some comfort from the fact that Tony Abbott himself isn't doing particularly well when compared to Julia Gillard. If we look at their dissatisfaction ratings and look at how that adds up, they're actually quite similar. They're both very negative. For Julia Gillard, her net satisfaction rating is negative 33 and Tony Abbott's is negative 31, and dissatisfaction with Tony Abbott's performance is actually up 4 percentage points in this. But ultimately, even though Tony Abbott has a very high dissatisfaction rating, that isn't translating into votes shifting across to Labor, and that's ultimately what counts. So this news poll confirms the overall picture for the Labor Party, the one they're not happy with, and that is a primary vote that is down in the doldrums and showing no signs of moving out of it.
Melissa Clark, good to talk. We'll speak soon.